and his moderator Leslie from Walt Disney Company Southeast Asia.
Hi everyone, how's everyone doing? Good. We've got a very exciting session here today. Ryan is obviously the head of Marvel Studios Visual Development Unit. Welcome to Singapore. I heard it's your first time here, right?
It is. Thank you for having me.
Great. I hope you've got some time to look around.
I have, yeah. We've been around the city a couple times.
Good. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to ask him a few questions and then we'll throw it to the floor for your questions as well, okay? So Ryan, first question. Tell us your secret origin. How did you get your start in doing what you do?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I grew up drawing a lot. We'll skip forward to that part. I grew up drawing a lot, so that's me when I was like 16. I did a lot of like colored pencil artwork. I did, this was something I did in high school, and then a few like airbrush pieces. But I always loved drawing, I always loved painting, and I ended up going to college for industrial design. And after that, I moved out to Los Angeles to go to art school. And while I was going to art school, I was fortunate enough to meet Ian McKeag, who was a design director for the Star Wars prequels. And he gave me my first movie gig, and that movie gig led to another one with him, and through him I met Jon Favreau, and I did a version of John Carter of Mars for Jon Favreau, and that project didn't go forward, so John's next project was Iron Man, so John actually hired me from the work that I had done for him on John Carter onto Iron Man.
Right. So, looking at your art, it's very, very beautifully drawn. It's a mix of watercolors as well as some other medium, right?
Actually,
you do a lot of different mediums.
I mean, besides that art that's from high school, this is all digital. I primarily work all in the computer, mostly in Photoshop. I do some stuff in 3D occasionally, right? To get a base for things. But a lot of what I do is actually just all in the computer. So this was actually in the production offices of the first Iron Man movie, and that's me when I was 29?
29, wow. That was like 10 years ago. Or
yeah.
11. It's like
11, yeah.
So in terms of your influences, who do you count as your major influences? What are your major influences?
You know, I grew up loving Marvel comics, so there's a lot of comic book artists that I would consider major influences. John Romita Sr., Todd McFarlane, but I also loved a lot of the old like 40s and 50s illustrators from America, so like Norman Rockwell and J.C. Leyendecker and Dean Cornwell. Right. Norman Rockwell was a really big influence on me. I still love his work.
That's great. And in terms of your current work, are you influenced by any like specific directors or visual artists in movies?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that's been great about working at Marvel Studios is each one of the directors that comes into the fold at Marvel Studios has their own sort of sensibilities, and we get to work pretty closely with them. So I'm inspired by the directors I get to work with on a very regular basis, as well as translating the comics. You know, all of the individual Marvel comics have such a strong visual style to them, and finding ways to interpret those things into things for the film. So like designing Iron Man's. This was an interesting thing. John had asked me to work on figuring out what Tony could be doing to build the suit. So I actually did this keyframe. This was the first thing that was done for the sequence of Tony sort of being like out of sorts testing the boots. So then I got to design the costume that went into that sequence, and also the boot. So these are like the things that end up coming together to make that scene happen.
Very cool. And do you read comic books these days? I mean, you're obviously influenced by people like Todd McFarlane, who is slightly older than John Romita Sr., but what about current books?
I do read comics. A lot of the stuff I read these days is primarily for work, because we're trying to keep up on things that are going, but and I can't really talk about things we're reading.
Of course.
But I loved comics from when I started reading them when I was in high school, or more like junior high.
Right.
So read Infinity Gauntlet and Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man and all the Jim Lee X-Men of that era. And that carried forward into the slightly more recent stuff, like this original Civil War comic. It's been a fun ride to sort of been really passionate about those books when I was younger, and to be able to work on things like Infinity Gauntlet that I was reading when I was 13 or 14.
Right. And tell us about the most challenging MCU project and why.
Most challenging. I mean, I feel like Infinity War has to be the most challenging thing, just because there were so many characters. It was such a big movie. Trying to get through all of the different designs that were gonna need to be in that film was a huge effort. It required, like, our team was probably about 25 artists to do that movie, and just the sheer scope of it, the amount of versions of characters we went through. It was a challenging one. I mean, they all have their own specific challenges, especially the first time that we're working on a character. Like figuring out what Doctor Strange's world is going to look like, or how Captain America is going to be brought into contemporary times.
Right.
But I think there's a real sense of back in the first Iron Man days, as well as like figuring out what a technology-based hero was going to look like was a challenge, and even to designing stuff like the arc reactor. I also occasionally get the chance to do props, so I actually did the drawings for the Mark I that Tony was supposed to have been drawing in the cave. But yeah, I think Infinity War is definitely like the most challenging thing that we've tried to accomplish.
Until Avengers 4 comes along, right?
Yes, indeed.
And who's your favorite director to work with in all the movies that you've done?
Oh, jeez. I mean, they're all amazing. I mean, the Russo brothers probably have to be right up there. Joss Whedon was amazing. Jon Favreau was amazing. John Watts, that directed Spider-Man movies. I don't know if I have a particular favorite, because they all bring such unique, taste to the projects. And I think just trying to get to know them, get to understand what they're looking for with each project was a real treat. John Favreau was one of those guys that really loves working with artists, and I have to credit him with actually bringing me into Marvel as well. So the idea of him actually thinking that an artist was worth sort of bringing from project to project was a lot of fun. And the other thing is, working with Kevin Feige is also amazing. He's the guy that's tying everything together, really bringing the visual style into the universe, making the universe feel like a cohesive whole, and that sort of being able to work with the directors and Kevin at the same time to sort of make the visuals work is a real blast.
Cool. And I know that you mentioned in some interviews that Spider-Man is your all-time favorite superhero. So what did it feel like when it was announced that Spidey was going to be in Civil War?
Look, I was kind of blown away. When we were doing Civil War, there were so many characters in that film that it felt daunting. And they just said, oh, Black Panther's probably going to be in the movie. So we were all trying to get through designs for Black Panther. And then when Kevin came into my office and he said, we might need to do some designs for Peter. And I said, Peter Quill? And he's like, no, Parker. And I'm like, ah! It was really, that was a dream come true. I never thought I was ever going to get to work on a Spider-Man
neither
project.
did I.
And I think the idea of trying to find something in Spider-Man's classic look that we could bring into the MCU was a real joy. I worked really hard on that one, and if I click through these fast enough, we'll get to the Spider-Man images. I did probably about 115 versions of Spider-Man to try and get him approved for Civil War.
Right.
Looking at all the different versions of it from the comics, there's a lot of cool versions from him, but they're usually based around a very specific storyline. Where it's Ben Reilly, or it's Otto Octavius is in his mind or something. So we're trying to find a look. Took a while. I tried all those versions, but then it just felt like, well, if it's not going to be Ben Reilly in the movie, like it shouldn't be the Ben Reilly costume.
Yeah, of course not.
So that was a real treat, and he's such an amazing character to draw. He's such an amazing character to design for. It was a lot of fun.
So obviously, I think it was influenced by several different artists and looks, right? So obviously, the mask was very much John Romita Jr. Senior, right?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up when I was very small. I think my first like exposure to Spider-Man was John Romita Senior's licensing art that he would have done for toys and like
everyone was
beach towels, and you know that work really defined for me what Spider-Man was. So I hadn't seen that one on a movie screen yet, so I was really interested in trying to get that look in the head on the film screen. I think the challenge of it was whenever the border around the eyes gets as thick as he was drawing it, I needed a way to justify that.
Right.
So I was coming up with like the idea of doing the emotive eyes as a way of not only being cool and emotive, but really just a reason to do the John Romita Senior eyes. I really wanted to try and get that in the movie. And thankfully, I only did one head design, and thankfully they bought that. Yeah. But the rest of the costume was heavily influenced by the classic look, and then bringing in the sort of Tony Stark elements is where it sort of started to make sense. Where you taking the classic look and then applying sort of a Tony Stark technology overlay. And it was a lot of fun also once we got to Homecoming, where we were taking the same suit and really showcasing a lot of the technology that was in it.
Yes, that's fantastic. Before we move to Thor, I wanted to allude to something that you showed just now with Watchmen. So Watchmen is probably the only other comic book movie that you did that's not from Marvel. So if you had a choice of a DC movie to work on, what would it be?
Look, I mean, all the characters from both companies are amazing. I'd love to work on a Batman. I don't know if it would be a specific movie, but I mean, I think most people would say Batman would be a fun character to design for. There have been so many amazing visuals for Batman that have always existed, but especially in the last couple of years, there's been so many cool versions. I don't know if I would need to take a stab at him because there's a lot of cool stuff going on, but it'd be fun to do that. I always loved Flash too. I ran track in high school, so we were wearing Flash T-shirts and stuff, stupidly walking around the track, and I would love to do a Flash design.
Cool. So moving on to Thor, with Thor Ragnarok, there was a lot of influence in the visual design of the movie with Jack Kirby's designs. So how did it come about? Was that something that the director wanted, or?
Yeah, Taika had said very early on that he wanted to try and reference Kirby. The sort of the strangeness of Sakaar really lent itself to trying to push that, push into that world. And I think Thor in the comics can be lots of different things. It can be very serious, or it can be a little bit sort of out there. And I think that style really lends itself to the strangeness that exists in some of the Thor books.
Yeah. What other influences were there with that particular movie, Ragnarok? Was Walter Simonson one of the big influences as well?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't the lead on that project. Andy Park was, but definitely I think Walt Simonson from the Ragnarok storyline definitely was a big influence. I think the classic look for Hela that Andy was working with too. Like, I think that movie is probably almost more directly comic inspired than any other film that we've done. Just because there's so many graphic, like, amazing qualities to it. From Hela's like amazing headdress to Hulk's kind of fun armor to the bright colors and crazy shapes on Sakaar.
Right. And one other question I've always had, it's really about the process of doing the visual design and development of a movie. How does that process work?
So we'll get started pretty early on projects, sometimes before a director or writers are involved. Sometimes this is an early pass on Captain America that I'd done.
Yes.
Almost 2 years before the production actually got going. Where they were sort of asking me to sit in a room and come up with things that I thought were cool for Captain America. So I got a chance to sort of digest all the cool stuff in the comics and then just start drawing. It's not sort of our normal process. We don't normally get that much time to sort of work on the characters, the keyframes. But generally speaking, we get started probably 8 months before the movie starts filming, and we'll start drawing and painting, and we'll start drawing different. We'll basically look at who's in the film, what are the different variations of the costume, and we'll probably do like 6 to 8 variations of the character, and then show them in a presentation and say like to the directors and producers, like, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
What do you think about this design versus that design? And they'll say we like this, we don't like that, and then we'll go back and do another 6 to 8 versions. We'll kind of do that over and over again until we get an approved design.
Right. To your point about casting, so does a casting decision change anything in your designs in any way?
I think once we have casting, it definitely does. Just because whenever I start a piece, like I usually start by drawing the head.
Yeah.
So if I have Chris Evans's face, like I know that I'm going to try and base the rest his face and his body proportions, and I know that I can sort of base the whole costume around that. I think in some cases the tone of the casting can really affect it. Like when we were working on Iron Man 2 and they ended up casting Mickey Rourke for Whiplash, like putting him in that costume really sort of made the costume work.
Right.
And I think specifically probably with Hela as well, like I think getting Cate Blanchett's face into that Hela headdress is a real is something that really makes that costume work.
Yes. Whilst Ryan is going through the slides, what I think we can do now is to get some questions from the audience. So if anyone has got questions, please raise your hand. Yes.
Hey Ryan, were you involved in the design for Captain Marvel? And have you seen the fan reaction to the costume, and how do you feel about that?
Actually, Andy Park designed Captain Marvel. I didn't have anything to do with it, but it's awesome to see how the fans have reacted to it and that they love it.
Right, and usually when you design these costumes, do you like ask the artist? Like McKelvey is very excited about the Captain Marvel design, but do you actually approach the artists first, or you just do your own thing and consult them later or whatever?
Yeah, I mean we're the ones that are sort of tasked with figuring out what the designs are, and we're always looking at different comic reference. To try and see what version from the comics is going to work for the story world the directors and producers are trying to create. I'm lucky enough to know some of the comic artists, so I'll like get in touch with Adi when I'm working on an Iron Man suit and say, hey, what do you think? But we're also really trying to accomplish what the needs of the story are. So it's sort of playing off of that balance of referencing stuff from the comics and then seeing what's going to work for the story world.
Any other questions? Yes, we've got somebody in front.
Hi. Just when doing the development of your concept designs, did Stanley happen to come as well to take a look at the work?
Did Stan take a look at it?
Oh, I've met Stan once, but I've never met him sort of on a production. I think they probably end up sending him some of the things or showing him, but I'm not aware of any of that interaction.
Thank you.
Hello. So you mentioned in Spider-Man you come up with like hundreds of different designs just to get like one of them approved. How do you deal with the loss of like 99% of the other material you produced?
How do I do what with it?
Like the rest of it just going in the trash.
Oh. Well, I can just show it to you guys. It's not going in the trash. I think that's just the nature of concept art. It's really, you're working on something that's going to end up being, on screen, fully realized. And your job is to sort of work through all the ideas that you can to really figure out what that really the right version is. And ideally, I would love to not have to do 100 versions, but it just sometimes that's how long it takes. Like some designs I got right in the first shot. Like the Captain America stealth costume from Winter Soldier, I did one design for it. So it's always a little bit you never really know if you're going to be able to get it quickly or not. But it's part of the fun to sort of search and try to push the limits. Because I think the more versions we get to do, it means the more we'll be able to think about the process.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
How much are you involved with the prop makers side of it, to like the people making costume? And how do you feel about the career of prop making versus visual dev?
Prop makers.
We're pretty involved. Film is a very collaborative process, so working with the costume designers and the prop masters to sort of participate in how things finally appear on screen is part of my job as well. Luckily, Marvel hires like the best costume designers and the best prop masters, so it's a very easy collaboration usually. And Alexandra Byrne, who's an Academy Award-winning costume designer, she worked on Thor and the first two Avengers movies and Doctor Strange, sort of described our collaboration as saying that we can achieve something together that we could never do on our own. And it's really sort of the best way I've found of thinking about it too, where we're really able to, if we're pushing the visual as far as we can, and then she's trying to take that and sort of make it push the practicality of as far as she can, we end up at a product that it feels like it's sort of, hopefully sort of like a next level sort of thing. And I feel like that collaboration is the only way that can really happen.
Thank you.
Hi Ryan, what was it like working on the Netflix Daredevil series? Because under IMDb, you're credited as a costume designer on that show versus art department on the rest of the shows. How does that process differ from working on the films? Thank you.
It's very similar to working on the films, except that I was sort of responsible for the final look for Daredevil in that final episode of the first season. It's very similar. I mean, they're using all the same all the same specialty costume houses in Los Angeles, and I get to work with people that I've worked with before, trying to accomplish specifically his costume and his cowl. I think it's that project was a lot of fun. It was working directly with Jeff Loeb and Joe Quesada. Instead of sort of doing versions of designs for directors and producers, I was doing versions of designs for those guys. And I think for me it was very similar to working on the films. It was a lot of fun.
Lots of questions, so we'll you've got one there and one there as well.
Hi, may I know what's your favorite MCU movie to work on?
I've enjoyed working on all of them. I think Iron Man 1 holds sort of a special place in my heart just because I got to work with really, really talented people at a time where everything felt very fresh and new. The idea of like sort of a startup movie studio isn't something that happens in Hollywood, really. And to feel like in all honesty, it was sort of my first big movie as well. And I was just feeling lucky to be there and felt really energized to work as hard as I could. And I was pulling all-nighters and sort of, I actually rented a second apartment that was closer to the studio so I could be at work earlier, which sounds kind of insane now, but I just had a lot of dedication and willingness to sort of do whatever it took to make it as good as I could. And that sort of, we were up at Stan Winston Studios when they were building the practical suits, and Adi will tell you the same story where we were there spending all-nighters trying to get the 3D models to a place where they were good enough for the presentation to the producers, and it was a lot of fun.
Oh, okay, we've got one there as well. We'll start with her first.
Hi. Do you ever feel like you're stuck during your design procedures, or is there like a tip you could give us when we face a wall during those processes?
The question is if I've ever felt stuck. Is that
when you feel stuck?
Yeah. Yes, I have felt stuck. Sometimes it happens when I've sort of tried as many things as I feel like I could. My design process usually starts from ideas. I like thinking about concepts, about characters, thinking about basically seeing the problem from for as many perspectives as possible. When I get stuck, usually I'm stuck when I really liked one of the ideas that I had and nobody else did. Which happens. I mean, I can fall in love with stuff and have things sort of not work out. For me, it really is the easiest sort of way to deal with that is just to be inspired, which is really the dumbest way of saying just to keep going and be energized about the work even though you're struggling. I also just go to the comic book store and just buy like old issues of things. I find myself just showing up and saying like, hey, where's a cool, Ditko or a cool John Romita Sr. that I can just be excited about owning and sort of looking through. Because I think so much of the stuff about these characters is that they're based in 60 or 70 years worth of like art and stories, and just sort of looking back at some of the things that would have inspired me when I was younger also helps. Just as design in general, if I ever feel like I'm getting stuck, I always just step back to ideas, because usually where I get stuck is where I'm sort of regurgitating the same idea with just a different visual solution. So if I step away from it and say, what's a new idea? What's a new art direction? If I could step back to the very beginning of a concept process, what is the thing that could be different that I haven't explored yet?
Thank you. Next.
Hi Ryan, I'm a big fan of Iron Man. So you've done sketches from Mark 1 to Mark 42 and above. So all this concept, how do you derive it from Marvel Comics, or because all these designs are quite different from Marvel Comics?
Just asking about how do we come up with different Iron Man designs?
That's right, and because a lot of it doesn't really come from the comic books.
Sure.
Original designs.
A lot of it also comes from the needs of the story. So if you look at the Mark 42, we had designed so Adi Granoff and Phil Saunders and I had all sort of worked on the designs between the Mark III and the Mark VII. And essentially when we got to the Iron Man 3 and the Mark 42, the director and the producers were really wanting to do something that felt different, because they were worried that the audience couldn't really tell that the suits had changed, because he was all primarily red and kind of had the same head, and it didn't feel that different. So a lot of it just came out of like, okay, we need something that feels really different. So that's why I pitched the idea of him being primarily gold with sort of red accents. And then because he was going to be broken up into multiple pieces, because the pieces fly onto him in Iron Man 3, it really came out of the notion of how can you break up an Iron Man suit maybe a little bit more than he had been broken up before, because it was a very slick, sort of smooth surface to all the previous designs. So we were trying to look for a sort of a design language that allowed for him to be made up of a lot of small pieces. So honestly, some of the design language comes out of needs of the story like that, where we know that they're going to want the suit to fly onto him in pieces. We know it needs to be very different this time. Going forward from that, I mean, Phil Saunders, who's the guy that designed the Civil War suit and the Age of Ultron suit at the end, and the Mark 50 from Infinity War, he's a car designer. He used to be a car designer, so he's always looking at things from just a surface point of view, like how could we do a cool new surface that we've never done before? And I think breaking it down to even just visual solutions like that lead to, very interesting Iron Man choices.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, I have a question. Among all the characters you have designed in MCU universe, which character took a really long time to get an approval?
Which character took the longest? Spider-Man's kind of up there. He took a while. Doctor Strange took a little while. Ultron took a really long time. Ultron was probably one of the longest. I know some of the other projects that I wasn't as heavily involved with also had characters like the Dark Elves took a really long time from Thor 2, and Ego from Guardians 2 took a while. A lot of the versions of characters that could be lots of different things. Like Ego could be many different things. So coming up with a look for him is challenging. But Ultron was very hard because Joss had a very specific notion of wanting him to feel like a real character, like almost very human. So we were trying versions that looked like that looked like the comics, but also we were trying things that felt like we're pushing him into a really like a human space, and that sort of dynamic was challenging. We're also somewhat limited in the fact that we're mostly doing like paintings. So what was necessary for Ultron was also doing sort of like almost animated sequences of how his face was going to move. So I think some of those will probably be coming up in here in a second. Trying to figure out how he would create emotion with different metal plates on his face was very specific, and it was also very challenging to accomplish. I think Ultron is probably one of those ones that just went on and on and on. But Spider-Man took a while.
Outside of his mask.
What's that?
Outside of his mask.
Outside of his mask, that's right, yeah. This was another fun part of it. I got to, for Winter Soldier, I got to do the Smithsonian murals. So I got to go to set and actually stand in front of the stuff that I painted when they printed it and put it on the walls. It was a lot of fun. And I did the concept for this one, which is, I think it's actually in the museum over here.
That's right.
But so this was sort of the concept for it, and then this is the full painting.
Wow.
And that was it, printed on set. And Chris was kind enough to take a picture with me.
Very nice. Any other questions from the floor? We've got one there.
Okay, I'll ask first. Yeah, Leslie.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Tina.
Hi, Ryan.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. All right, my question is about women's costume and armor. Like in the comics, like they have boob windows or cleavages, to draw the male gaze. But in movies where you were mentioning in our interview during the media preview as well that you want some grounded reality. So how do you balance that and the aesthetics? You need to it looks good as well in the movie. So how do you balance that, and what considerations do you take when designing a woman's superhero or supervillain's costume?
I mean, we're always trying to make the actors look as good as possible, so depending on the character, sometimes that means heightening their athleticism. But we're also just trying to be true to what the character is in the comics, but also come up with a very aesthetically pleasing look for the film, and making the costume work for the tone of the movie. And a lot of times there are things from the comics that aren't necessarily appropriate for the tones of the film that we're going for. So some of those things fall by the wayside, but we're still trying to stay as true to the character from the comics as possible.
Thank you.
Hi. Yes, my question is regarding the workflow. Like if you start, for example, sculpting in ZBrush first and pose and then paint over, or do you do sketches? And so what is your workflow? What software do you use? And yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, it's all depending on the project and the character and what's going to be most useful for the production. Sometimes, like this one is just a straight painting. Some of the characters, when we do digital characters, like we're doing the Hulk or Thanos, I will do my best to create a 3D model, not only to sort of come up with something that's more solid, but also so that once it gets approved, it can be passed to visual effects and they can use it as part of their pipeline. But it's also, it's kind of dependent. I've started to do more stuff in ZBrush and in Render It and Keyshot, just because I find that I don't necessarily want to be giving art direction as much as I'd rather just try to get it as right as possible, as sort of as finished as possible. But it's always a challenge because it's always about time. if I have enough time to model something, if I have enough time to figure it out in 3D, I will do my best to do that. But sometimes it doesn't allow for that. The time doesn't allow for it, so I just end up painting it as fast as I can.
Thank you. We've got time for just 2 more questions.
Hi Ryan. Over here.
Hello.
Yeah, while you're the head of the visual development in Marvel Studios, which is largely doing artworks and stuff, so what's your and your team's role in terms of the storytelling in the filmmaking process?
Could you repeat that?
Your team's role and yourself, your role in the storytelling process in the filmmaking.
Sure. So when we get started on a project, sometimes the scripts are locked, sometimes they're not, sometimes we only have an outline. So what we can do in terms of the story process is really suggest things, but it's not like big beats that we're suggesting. It's more like, how does Doctor Strange use magic, in a way that could be very visual for the audience, or coming up with the tone of a particular scene. So we can suggest story ideas as well through visuals, but it's more about, for us, like sort of nailing what the look of the film is going to be as early as possible. The earlier we can get involved and try and figure out what characters look like, what a moment looks like. My team is all incredible artists. I'm very fortunate to have them working for us. A lot of times we'll all take stabs at specific characters. I think all of us took stabs at Ultron when I was saying Ultron took a while. But sort of moments like this was sort of pitched by Joss very early on, of the first reveal of Ultron, that perhaps when Wanda and Pietro are walking up to him, like he's draped and hooded, and you have this sort of intense visual of him, and then when he reveals himself, Pietro jumps in front of Wanda to protect her, and you sort of see Ultron for the first time. And in the film it plays out very similar to this. And so in terms of the storytelling, we're trying to figure it out in a visual way, even if it's just representing more or less what's in the director's head.
Any other questions? Okay, we've got time for 2 more, so 1 there and 1 at the back.
Hi Ryan. Here.
Oh, hi, sorry.
Hi. So I just want to ask, have you designed characters that either never appeared in the movies in the end, or like characters that could appear in future movies?
Yes, and I probably can't tell you which ones those are.
That's fair.
But there are things like we come up with ideas, for characters and for moments that often aren't used. I mean, there's I was talking to some of the press before about the on the first Iron Man movie, there was going to be a scene where you saw Obadiah Stane breaking into Tony Stark's house, and they needed to disable Jarvis. So I had designed like an entire computer console that was going to be basically Jarvis. So you saw Jarvis being destroyed for a few minutes of the film, and that was never in the movie. There's things like that in different places, but nothing. And some other main characters, they always toy with the notion of, I mean, you guys have seen enough Marvel movies to know that they like to put things in at the end, right? So they toy with ideas like that about sometimes doing things, and we will do versions of characters that never end up in that film, but maybe they'll end up in a film 2 or 3 down the line. Like Howard the Duck was one of those ones that was added at the very last minute on Guardians 1 that I got to design. And there are probably a few other examples like that, but I can't tell you what they are.
It's just that, for example, like once you get the green light that you're going to make a future movie, I mean, I'm not going to say what it is. I mean, let's pretend that the movie begins with the letter X or F, and once they say, okay, go time, and then you're like, and then you assure the people, you just pull out the drawer in the metal cabinet and you say that, hey, I've been doing these things in my free time. Does that happen?
It used to happen. One of the problems is like the movies are I'm so busy that I don't have an extra time. Like I literally was I was working from 8:30 in the morning till 3 a.m. for about 2 weeks straight to try and finish the Avengers Infinity War book covers, the art book covers, on top of finishing things for Avengers 4, on top of finishing other, like, there's just so many things going on that I wish I had time to actually be doing stuff like you're talking about. But I think we're sort of at the point where the projects are so intensive and there's so many cool things happening that I think I just don't have enough. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough spare cycles of work to really work on things that far in advance anymore.
Okay.
Thank you. One last question.
Hey Ryan. Okay, so I'm here. Hi. Okay, so I'd like to ask, other than the comics, were there any notable films or games that really inspired you and your art to becoming who you are today? Like notable.
Films or games? I mean, films definitely. Star Wars.
Yeah.
Yeah. I loved Tron when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I think if there's anything else.
Games.
Probably games. Games. I mean, I grew up playing all the same game, all the Nintendo games that probably everybody else did. That's my age, if anyone is my age here. I don't know if any of them specifically inspired me to do this type of work. Star Wars was probably the main influence. I'm sure there's other ones that I'm not thinking of right now. Sorry, I can't come up with anything else.
That's all right.
It's all right. If you think of anything else, let her know. She can go to your booth and look for you.
Just before I finish here, so this was an idea very early on about, they were talking about with Doctor Strange. They wanted the coat to maybe transform. So I was doing these different versions that actually ended up animated to sort of show how he could go from looking sort of more normal to sort of a more heightened comic look. And these are some of the things that I come up with, where it was just sort of a wipe down that would sort of transform him. And then this one, buttoning the coat. And then this one. But these are the types of things we do lots and lots and lots of versions of things like this, and most of them don't end up in the film. But are we out of time?
No, we've got maybe about 2-3 minutes.
Okay,
we can go through some more.
Cool. I'll just keep clicking through things. Initially, the Zealots were going to be much stranger looking in Doctor Strange. Scott Derrickson had a lot of fun ideas about trying to make them feel like they're being taken over by the dark dimension. So this was really a fun exploration. I was also fortunate enough to design Mordo for that film. It's pretty cool. I actually cut about 100 of those out. It still was too many.
Yeah.
Okay,
so we've got Spidey.
Finally, here's some Spider-Man stuff. I had started with a red and black costume on Spider-Man. The Russos tended to like that. And then I also went to this very, very blue version. There's the Ben Reilly costume. Figuring out how the web cartridges could go on his belt. So I think this was the approved design that was actually done before production on Civil War started, and then it got changed in post. And these are some of the versions I did in post-production to sort of address some of the notes that the Russo brothers had.
Right.
They had wanted to see him with a bigger spider. And then this is where I started to add some more Tony Stark elements, where it ends up feeling more like a technology-based suit instead of sort of just the classic. And this is pretty much the final that was done for Civil War. And then this was the sequence that I had used to pitch the idea of the emotive eyes. and the web shooters. I'd also pitched this idea that perhaps there was a laser pointer on the laser aim, that when he spread his fingers he could widen it, and then it would actually become a menu system.
Right.
So he could move his thumb around to select a specific web option.
Right.
And then once he selected it, it would fire.
Very nice.
Design the inside of the Spider-Man suit as well. It was a great idea from John Watts that the suit would come on really baggy and then tighten. So when I was 18, I made myself Spider-Man masks. So when we were doing the homemade suit, I was able to sort of reference some of those. That was me wearing my homemade 18-year-old mask. So I actually had some experience with what an 18-year-old could make. So that's meant to be that version of that mask with the Scarlet Spider costume. And did some designs for Vulture as well.
Vulture's awesome.
It was a lot of fun, like doing the friendly neighborhood version of Spider-Man, putting him in sort of more everyday settings instead of always be, web slinging through Manhattan.
Right.
I also got a chance to do some poster design concepts for that film.
Nice.
So based on the
Amazing Fantasy 15.
Yep.
Very cool.
Right. I think we're coming to the end here. I also got a chance that this is actually the Guardians of the Galaxy ride at Disneyland. This is a portrait that hangs in that ride. And this is another portrait, a sort of painting that hangs in that ride as well. I was also fortunate enough to design Thanos for Infinity War, and this is the Infinity War Comic-Con piece I did for San Diego last year. And I think that's the last slide. So.
Yep. So thank you so much, Ryan. It's actually such a privilege to see all this work in progress and final designs. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
We enjoyed that. Thank you so much, everyone.